bits. What do I do with my bits? Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. I'm super excited for today's video, and I also am excited about this top that I made, and I'm really excited to show you my cute little bumblebees, and it's my first time embroidering, so here it is. I'm gonna have more pictures of it up on my Instagram, so check that out. And the project I'm about to show you. So all these scraps and bits on my table are from this jacket that I'm about to thrift flip, so watch what I do. Alright, this is gonna be fun. I weirdly found this jacket in the electronics section at Value Village, and then it came home with me. After staring at it for a month, I finally decided what I was gonna do. A pinafore or romper style dress. The fur on this thing was disgusting. It was turning brown in places. I did really like the pockets though, with the little fluffy detail. Let's start already. As most projects start, we're going to seam rip. Let's remove that shearling lining. Oh, look, it's got quilted sleeves. Let's pull off this nasty fur lapel and collar. Yuck. And the trim, too. Next, pull off the sleeves. Separate the top and bottom at the waist. Take the pocket out. Silly fake but not fake pocket. Remove the buttons. I've taken it apart enough, I can start altering. I'm going to drop the back of the neck by about 1 inch and cut that away. I cut away half and then folded it over so that I could match it on the other half. Next, I thought I wanted to have a scoop neck in the front, so I drew out my scoop with seam allowance. So I am a pretty indecisive person, and you will find out just how much during this video. I went in a lot of directions and then decided to do something different, so bear with me through this video. I opened up the shoulder seam. Clearly I was feeling pretty fearless using the scissors, and using a curved ruler, I drew a new front side edge. New but not permanent. It's gonna change later. Then I cut it out. I took that cutout and flipped it over to the other side and drew the same mark so I could make them the same. And cut it out. I went back to the front scoop neckline and changed it up a little bit. This is where erasable markers come in handy. And thinking that I was satisfied, I cut it out. I hit a bit of a wall here and decided to move on to the back instead. I folded the back piece in half, drew a straight line down from the shoulder to the hem, and cut that out. I'm not a fan of my shoulder straps falling off. Some people make it look so cute as it falls off, but I need them to stay on. So that's why I decided to make a pretty solid back piece. Next, I threw the front pieces up on my mannequin. I placed it where I wanted it to be. Then it is this point in which I decided that I wasn't gonna have a scoop neck. I looked at so many pictures of these, and I really didn't want to have a V-neck. I thought they didn't look as good as scoops. And yet, I used pins as markers, pinning anywhere I thought that the seam would be. Once I was happy with the placement, I pulled it off and played connect the dots. I used my curved ruler to draw a line between the shoulder and the waist, connecting all the pins in between. I ended up moving them around a little bit so I could get a nice smooth curve. I kept finding these stickers stuck everywhere to the inside of this fabric. Does anyone know what they mean? I left 1/2 inch for seam allowance and cut one side out. I flipped that side over onto the other, and I pinned in important places like at the dart, the shoulder seam, and the waist. Then I cut out the other side to match the first side. I also should mention that before I cut it out, I placed it on my body and made sure I was happy with the fit. At this point, I decided to serge everything that could possibly be serged. Serge, serge, serge. I didn't need to serge the ends of my top because I knew they were going to get sandwiched in a waistband I was going to make next. I also didn't serge the darts because I didn't want to add any excess bulk to them. I folded under my serged edges about 1/2 inch and pinned them in place. Then I top stitched it down. As an attempt to lengthen this dress, I'm going to add a waistband. I measured around the waist of the skirt. Using the sleeves, I'm going to make a waistband, and I should have just enough fabric. I'm going to open up my seams in the sleeve. I love when your seam ripper just glides through the thread. With the amount of fabric I had to work with, I decided to make a 3-inch wide waistband. I needed to cut out 2 strips from each sleeve. They needed to be 4 inches wide and the length of the sleeve. So I measured and cut it out, and using one side as a template, I brought it over to the other sleeve and cut that out too. I pinned 2 strips together, making sure that the nap ran in the same direction. I stitched them together, and this is going to be the front of the waistband. The other 2 will be the inside. Next, we're going to move on to the skirt, because it has to be almost done before it can get stitched onto the waistband. I pinned the opening where the fluffy pocket detail was, and stitched it back up. Next, I had to take away the old buttonholes, because I knew I wasn't going to use them. The skirt also was going to be too big for me, so I decided to take that extra bit out from the center front. Making sure I had enough for seam allowance, I cut away at exactly the point where the buttonholes ended. Next, we're going to pin the waistband onto the skirt. So starting from the center back, which is easy to identify on the waistband with our seam. I was either feeling bold or impatient because I decided to pin both sides of the waistband at the same time, sandwiching the skirt in between. This can be done in 2 steps instead to make it easier. First, you pin on the front side of the waistband to the skirt fabric and then stitch it on. Then you do the same with the back. Then I'm going to pin outwards towards the front of the skirt. At this point, I hadn't decided what I wanted to do with the center front of the skirt, how I wanted to close it. So when it came to stitching on the waistband, I just left the ends open about 1 inch or 2 so that I could figure out what I wanted to do. I weighed my options between zipper and buttons and decided, because I didn't currently have a zipper that would work, I would go with buttons. I serged the center front of the skirt as well as the whole hem of the skirt, folded it up 1/2 inch and top stitched it all down. Then I was able to finish off that last 1 or 2 inches of the waistband. And now we're going to move on to the side of the waistband. So with right sides together, it's going to be folded over your skirt. And we're going to stitch as close as we possibly can to the skirt underneath. With your fingers, you can kind of feel where the skirt ends. I use that as my stitching marker. Once it is stitched, you can clip the corner and any excess bulk and then fold it in. I may or may not have done this many times, and I think I only got an okay edge. But practice makes perfect. Once I was happy with my edge, I went back inside and graded my seams. Grading your seams just reduces bulk. Basically, it's just cutting the seam allowances at different lengths. This side turned out better, I swear. At this point, I tried it on and felt a little bit like the paper bag princess. So I decided to make it a little more form-fitting by adding an elastic in the waistband, but not throughout the whole thing, just at the center back. So using the side seams of my skirt, I drew lines into the waistband. I cut a piece of elastic and marked the center. Because I only had 2-inch elastic and my waistband was 3 inches, I wanted to make sure that the elastic was going to sit in the center of the waistband, so I marked the center point of the elastic on the center and on the edges. I then marked the center point in the waistband at the center and where my sides were going to sit. And lining up those center points, I pinned the elastic in place. Using a straight stitch, I stitched down the elastic at the sides and the center. I continued this stitch over the whole 4 inches of the waistband. I didn't want to stop and start only 2 inches in. I also flipped it to the right side and used the stitch in the ditch technique to sew the center stitch. So now that the skirt is attached to the waistband, I'm going to attach the top. So I pinned the top in place. Before stitching it together, I tried it on and made sure everything fit. I also decided that I wanted to have the straps overlap a little bit in the center front. So the strap on the right is going to get pinned all the way to the edge of the waistband, and the strap on the left isn't going to get pinned until about 2 inches over. I stitched these pieces onto the front of the waistband. With the back of the waistband, we're going to fold under 1/2 inch and line this up with the front. We want the back of the waistband to sit a little bit lower than the front so that we don't see it poking up from behind. We're going to pin it in place all along the waistband. The elastic section was pretty tricky because it was stretchy and the fabric wasn't stretchy and we had to get it all to fit. Anyways, if you know a better way, please let me know down in the comments, because there must be an easier way. Once it's all pinned in place, then I can stitch it. I decided to top stitch the whole waistband at about 1/2 inch. I started with the top edge, catching the back of the waistband and all the bits sandwiched in between. When I got to the elastic portion, I had to pull the elastic to its full extent so that the waistband would sit flat. Once I passed that hurdle, I was able to move around the rest of the waistband. Because I wanted the elastic to sit in the middle of the waistband, I decided to secure it with a stitch right down the horizontal center. Using a piece of tape as a guide on my sewing machine, I placed it at 2 inches from the stitching line. And once again, I had to pull it to its fullest extent so that it would sit flat and I could stitch it. That's pretty cute! I noticed that you could see the white of the pocket from the outside, so I decided to change that to brown. Because I didn't use a lining or a facing in the skirt and I was going to have buttons, I decided to back it with interfacing just to give it a little more strength. This fancy tool, get out of here. This fancy tool is called a velvet board. Its one purpose in life is to help you iron velvet. A velvet board is kind of like a carpet. You can also get ones made of wire. They're called a needle board. Basically, it allows the velvet to sit flat, interlaced in the board, so that when you iron it, it doesn't crush the velvet. Because I had the iron out, I decided to go over the whole thing with it. It made an insane difference. Who knows how long this thing's been sitting in a thrift store. It may not be my favorite thing to do, but pressing or ironing are pretty important. I'm going to press the darts open so that they lie flatter. Introducing another fun ironing tool. This is called a tailor's ham. It is a ham-like object, and I think it's filled with sand or something of the like so that you can put pins in it. It's got a bit of weight to it, and you can iron on top of it. It is in this wonderful ham-like shape, so you can press curves easier. When I went to school, most of our machines would do a buttonhole automatically. It was all digitized, and I hated it. Somehow, every buttonhole I made would mess up, screw up, and I had no control over it. I would just punch in the numbers, press go, and it would fail. So because of this, I have always been reluctant to do anything with buttons. But here I am doing buttons. I wanted to show you guys not to be afraid to do buttonholes. No matter what method you use, whether it's automatic, manual, or doing it yourself by hand, you can make buttonholes, and they will be beautiful. I'm going to use the seam ripper to open up the buttonholes I just made. We're going to start from one corner and work our way to the center, and then go to the other corner and work the way to the center. That way we're not going to accidentally open up too far past our button stitches. Then we can sew on our buttons. Make sure to test and make sure that your button fits through the hole, and if not, make it a little bit wider or stitch it back up and make it a little bit smaller. Then I had a mid-flip crisis. Because the first 2 buttons looked really good, I decided I wanted to do buttons all the way down the center front. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough of those buttons, so I had to pick something else. I dumped all my buttons out and asked Milky for help. I finally picked something and took the old ones off and put the new ones on. Then I figured out the placement for the rest of the buttons and marked the buttonholes. Back to making more buttonholes. I opened up those holes just like I did the last time. I lined the center front up correctly, I marked through the buttonhole as to where the button should sit. I stitched my buttons in place. Look, they're so good. I'm really glad I switched to different buttons. And for my very last step, because I didn't serge the darts on the center front and center back, I decided to use fray check to make sure they wouldn't unravel. Fray check is basically like glue for fabric. You just run it along the edge of your fabric and it'll hold it all together so it doesn't fray. It can change the color of your fabric. So if you're using it on a visible edge, make sure you do a sample test. So let me remind you what this jacket looked like when we first bought it. And this is what we've done to it. This was one of my most anticipated projects. I was super excited the moment I saw this jacket. I knew I had to do something to it, and I'm very, very happy I did. And going through the whole process, I did make a few changes and back steps, but I'm really happy with how it ended up. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I had a really fun time with this one. It was a pretty big project and I had a lot of decisions to make. If you want to give me a hand making decisions, because I'm so bad at it, go over to my Instagram. I'm going to be posting questions, very hard questions. What color buttons? How many buttons? Where buttons? Things like that. I'm going to be posting them on my story so you guys can give me a hand making these decisions. I would really appreciate it because I don't know. Thank you so much again for checking out this video. We will see you all on the next one. Bye!